Or response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.
Everybody knows not to drink and drive, but some people still think it's okay to take drugs and drive. Police have the authority, the ability, and the tools to determine if drivers are impaired by legal or illegal drugs. And because drug-impaired drivers can pose just as great a risk as drunk drivers, they face the same penalties, like the loss of their driver's license, a criminal record, fines, and more. A message from the RCMP, the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, and Arrive Alive, Drive Sober.
This is Rogers TV, Grey County. The opinions expressed in the following program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers nor Rogers TV.
Hi, and welcome to Politically Speaking, COVID-19 edition. I'm David Shearman. My guest today is our MPP, Bill Walker, and Bill is in his home here in Hepworth, and we're going to be talking to him about some of the things that he's been doing over the last last few weeks, and of course, our central focus is what's happening in Ontario and in this community around COVID-19. Bill, welcome. Good to have you here.
Thank you very much, David. Always a pleasure.
Now, I should give a note to our viewers that if Bill's video seems to freeze, that's a technical issue, and it's not on your end. It's not something that's happening on your screen. It's just something that is part of the process and the way we're doing our programming from now on. So, as they used to say many years ago, do not adjust your set. Bill? You're too young to remember that.
No, I get it.
Bill, this has been a challenging time for the government and for all of our elected members, both our MPs and our MPPs, because you're right at the center of government action, especially as a member of cabinet. I'm sure things are happening, and they're happening very, very quickly.
Very much so, David. There truly isn't a playbook for this. Nobody has ever gone through this before, so you can't turn to the side guy or girl beside you and say, "Hey, what did you do the last time?" This is all brand new, and I have to say, there's just so much volume. I mean, even something, if you will, they're not simple, but I'm going to try to simplify it. Something like an emergency order to change a regulation that is coming at you that prohibits payment of certain things or the ability to move forward. Those all have to be done, and staff, again, behind the scenes are working extremely diligently around the clock, frankly, to look at all those into the future and say, what do we have to be bringing forward so that it doesn't have some little technical glitch actually stop payment for a program or a support. We're trying to manage the current day. We're trying to look ahead to what the future holds. And again, there is no black and white science to this. There isn't an actual date. You can say by this date, we're going to be done this or this will happen. Even the medical experts can't predict that. So very much fluid, very much on the go. And to your point, cabinet meets on a very regular basis. Many of us as ministers are doing things in between those, obviously, and trying to keep up, frankly, and it's always my priority, our home folks taking care of their needs and urgent requests. So my staff, our office is open. They're doing a great job. Again, I can't say enough for my staff, Alex, across the province, our public service, but our localized staff who have kept everything moving. They're forwarding everything to me where it needs immediate action, and we're trying to do the best we can.
I will also have to say that I've been impressed with the Premier's presence in this very difficult time. If, with all respect, and I hope you'll get the reference, Doug Ford seems to have found his inner Bill Davis. It's absolutely wonderful to see. Again, you're too young to get that.
No, I get it. And in fact, I have great admiration. Premier Davis actually came to one of my events for my nomination. So I highly regard and I believe very highly in how Premier Davis governed when he did for many, many years. I think what you're seeing is the Doug who, because in cabinet and in caucus, we get to see him in that natural surrounding. He truly is an empathetic person. He is the type of person that would truly give you the shirt off his back and wants to solve every single issue. And I think this has actually allowed people to see the true Doug Ford. And he is very much concerned. He absolutely has deferred and said, the health stuff, I'm not the expert. I'm going to defer to Dr. Williams and the cascade of professionals around what we're calling the command table, along with Minister Elliott and Minister Fullerton and the healthcare sector especially. And I think he just truly has risen to the need. We always hear those old adages that sometimes crisis brings out the good in people and the true spirit. And I think absolutely with Premier Ford, what you see is what you get.
Yeah, I know you've mentioned about his genuineness and his caring in our previous interviews. So it's nice. It's good to see that on display and present for the people of Ontario. You mentioned the regulations that keep coming, and they keep coming out, but they always seem to have some major significance and seem to put people first. I'm thinking, for example, of the work that was done most recently around community gardens. I know that was an issue. Community gardens were a very important piece that people were concerned about because planting time is coming. And the government rose to the occasion and got that regulation right through and in quite a bit, with quite a bit of speed. And I know that was appreciated by that community.
Absolutely, and that's a prime example, David. When we originally put out the order to shut things down as much as we could, we knew from the medical professionals, again, we had to stop the spread. We had to really be severe and get the message so that people were truly adhering to it. So at that time, we had a fair bit of pushback from people from community gardens that said we can't start allowing a whole bunch of exemptions or it waters it down. It allows it to be 2 weeks. So we held firm, but it shows, I think, again, that many of us around the cabinet table and the caucus table did take that feedback. We put it back through the filter of cabinet. And in this case, we were able to utilize an order to get that through and open them up because we're certainly sensitive to things like that, the crops, those type of things. There's only a window that works if you're able to get them planted. So I want to say thank you again to those people who did their job and advocated as they did properly for their communities, and to, again, the people behind the scenes that pulled that regulation forward and figured out in a very timely manner how we could address, how we could proactively change. And today, I think everyone is the beneficiary of that.
Well, what's the government doing to help people who are on the edges? I'm thinking of food banks, and we've got OSHARE here in Owen Sound. Is the government doing anything special for those groups?
Yes, and I can't remember the exact, there's so many numbers flying around, but I think a couple of weeks ago, there was about a $200 million fund. Of course, Bruce and Grey counties certainly were part of that. And I believe in the specifics of OSHARE, they have been able to tap into a little bit of that money that was funneled to the county for a number of projects and to be able to do that. Of course, we're trying to make provision wherever we can. It's very challenging because there are so many groups out there, and you'll appreciate this, David. I know a lot of them personally. I'm approached by a lot of them. We're not going to be able to fund absolutely every single need of every single group out there, but we certainly are in the masses, and something like OSHARE that serves such a wide contingent to be able to funnel our help and support and do that at all levels of government. So the federal government gave money. We then took it and passed it along to, in this case, the county, and the county is going out to those grassroots groups. So very much contingent. There was some money put in by Community and Social Services, again, to ensure that people on things like Ontario Works and ODSP could actually partake and not be clawed back, or be clawed back as much as they possibly could be. And one thing that was very significant, and I want to give Minister Smith and Minister Dunlop huge kudos. One of the things that they fought for very strenuously is to ensure when some of those things happen and more money comes in through another venue, again, old regulation would say you lose access to that program. What they could have lost, frankly, were their benefits, their health benefits. So they, again, worked very stringently with the bureaucracy to make sure those programs allowed them to retain their benefits while getting more of that income coming in from the federal program. So it takes a lot of on the ground, boots on the ground, brains, collective spirit, and frankly, most importantly, passion and empathy from people like our ministers to make sure that those are safeguarded.
What was really interesting in the tranche of money that you just mentioned, Bill, was that the money went to the counties. It went to the organization practically closest, the government level, closest to people, to say, okay, you figure out what is really needed in your community. And that seems to have worked quite well. The other thing that I was quite impressed with, and you mentioned it briefly, was that the bureaucrats, as they're sometimes called, but the public service has certainly done an excellent job of saying, we can do this, this, and this, and here's how you do it. And they're kind of like the politicians get the public kudos. It's the public service that is really doing the grunt work here, the heavy lifting, and is really doing, I think, a fabulous job of meeting the needs of the people of Ontario.
Absolutely, David, and thank you. Bureaucrats in my mind isn't meant as a bad moniker. It's just probably more common in my head. But absolutely, the public servants that serve, and I consider myself one of those as well. So absolutely, they are the people. They've typically been the people that wrote the regulation, did the groundwork, did the legal aspects. So they know best how you take that existing regulation and can utilize it to its best practice, or say, here's the spirit of intent, here's how we can do it so we still protect the essence of what it meant, but we can slightly, in cases like this, maneuver it. So absolutely, and you're bang on. Those people are definitely giving 100% effort out there to ensure, and again, that is twofold. I think certainly the ministers in most cases are driving that and saying, here's what we want, how do we do it, and leave the detail work to them and do the thing. And yes, they don't get the kudos. They also probably don't take nearly as much of the hammering that we do at the front lines as well when we don't get things right.
Well, I was also going to mention, Bill, that we've been very fortunate here in Grey Bruce that we have a huge partner in many of the endeavors for in this time of COVID-19, and that, of course, is Bruce Power. I think of the work they do in terms of providing PPE, the work they have done to liaise with the health unit to make sure that all of those that equipment gets to the right place on the right time, and people who need it have it. And they've just really stepped up to the plate, not just as an employer, but as a community partner.
Big time, David. I can't say enough. They originally came along with 600,000 pieces of PPE. They have just recently doubled that to 1.2 million pieces. They did actually make a huge donation, I believe, in Bruce-Grey, Huron, and Perth to the food banks. So again, back to some of those collective agencies that are doing yeoman service out there, as they always do. They just recently came out, I believe, with 50,000 bottles of hand sanitizer, working with some local companies to be able to do that. Gabraflex is one of those companies in Paisley that has now jumped in and doing suits and the ability to provide those. So not only corporately have they done that and provided funding, they've retained those employees. And I've got a couple of emails, in regard to that. They're actually retaining at their cost as the company to keep all of those employees on the payroll rather than putting them onto the public service, which you and I, again, as taxpayers would be paying for. So they're doing a lot of great things. We're fortunate to have them in our backyard. And they're also playing two key roles as we go through this. It may be just, maybe it's just inherent, but they're providing that power that most of us are consuming more of at a base that, 24/7. They are the reliable, stable, clean form of energy. So that's great. And the one that I always try to make sure people understand, especially in a time like COVID, the isotope production that both Bruce Power and OPG are creating a significant portion of the world's sterilization at this point. So as you know, all of the sterilization for all of those medical things come from basically Bruce Power and OPG here in our own province of Ontario. So to Bruce Power, to every single one of you, especially your leadership and your board who make these decisions, thank you so much.
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting recognition that Bruce Power, who kind of have been off in the corner for so long, we know they're there, but they're a major player in this field of isotopes for sterilization. It's one of those funny things that you don't realize. Oh, it's here. that's one of the things that is kind of made in Grey Bruce, and we're grateful for that.
And not only here, David, they're producing a couple of significant, and I don't know all the names off the top of my head, and some of them I can't pronounce even when I do know it, but I believe there are another 12 that they're actually in exploration of to try to expand the ability. Now that they've really said we have this capability, and this is indicative, I think, of one of the things that's going to come out of COVID. When we have the ability to produce it here in Ontario, why would we ever give that up to somewhere else and take away that ability to provide firsthand for ourselves? So again, not only that perspective, it's creating jobs, it's creating revenues that are a source to keep those great enterprises moving forward. The other thing that I think, if I can just plug them, they're doing these town halls once every couple of weeks. And I think that communications piece to allow so many people from across our area, our vast region, to tune in and hear people like Dr. Ara, like our wardens or whoever they have on as their guest speakers. I think they're doing a great job there of opening up that communication, letting people hear directly, like you are today with Rogers TV, but just allowing people to really have dialogue back and forth in a time you can't over communicate. And I just want to, again, thank you for all you do, Bruce Power, in every facet.
I'd like to switch topics a little bit, or for a moment, Bill, and ask you about agriculture. We talked a moment ago, this is the window for planting. But I know that the beef producers have been very concerned about the lack of slaughter capacity and the closure of the export markets and those kinds of things. And while they're federal issues, agriculture is certainly a very provincial issue. And I wonder if you had any comments on the agricultural situation.
Absolutely, David. And again, just to all the farmers out there, I've always had the greatest respect. We are an agricultural area. It still is our biggest piece of our economy is agriculture at the end of the day. And times like this really rise to the top in regard to the challenges that they actually have and always have encountered. And I mean, most farmers that I know, and I say that very reverently, are people who just deal with the world the way it comes at them. They can't control most of the variables. So they're pretty amiable, but they're very resourceful and they're very resilient. They are coming to us saying there are some challenges. I'll speak to packing if I can very quickly. That is a big one where, again, sometimes we've allowed one or two large organizations have the bulk of the work, if you will. And when one of those plants goes down or they make a change, that really impacts the ability for our local farmers to get their cattle beast to a processing plant, which just stops the whole supply chain down. So again, it has brought to light that other decisions from the past, shutting down a lot of our small rural abattoirs, may have been a good move, if you will, from a cost effectiveness, if you will, because a big plant can do more in a cost effective manner. But it certainly limits you when that one plant goes down and now you take 50% of your capacity out of the system. So I think it's going to be something that we, again, will have to take a look at and reevaluate and say, was that really, now that we've experienced a COVID, the best situation? Should we be looking at ways to make a regional opportunity here and work with some of those large companies and show them? I think it also does show, so I've heard from beef, sheep, grain, and pork producers that are all experiencing different challenges. I can assure you, I've spoken to Minister Hardeman and PA Pettipies. They're both working very diligently on this situation. A lot of work, particularly at the ministerial level, goes on behind closed doors, or if you will, on the phone to Ottawa to his colleague. And I believe what we have to do is impress upon particularly the federal government, who in this COVID situation typically is leading the charge with funding, and then we take it and adapt it to what's best for each province. That is going on. We are hearing them loud and clear. I've got a call scheduled for later this afternoon with Rob Lipsett from the beef farmers in our backyard. He sits on the Canadian Beef Ontario and the Canadian beef producers. So we'll be having a good chat, and I just want everyone to be assured we've heard them, and some of these things take a bit of time to make sure we understand the need and can react. But agriculture is absolutely critical in Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound and frankly across our country.
Bill, one of the things that we've all had a deep concern about is long-term care. It appears that COVID-19 has found a weak spot in our system, and it seems to be having a terrible impact, an awful impact on long-term care, especially in the GTA. Less so here, we hope and pray that it will not have that impact. But there have been 3 outbreaks in the local Grey Bruce long-term care centers. Will the government be doing more, and will be addressing the long-term care issue going forward?
100%. And I think you've heard certainly the Premier, Minister Fullerton, who I think is doing a great job to be that voice, Minister Elliott, again, who understands that. You know, even in speaking with Dr. Eyre, our local medical officer of health, who I have the highest regard for and has had a great experience around the world, frankly, you know, one of the things that hasn't come out yet is why is this particular virus so impactful, if you will, to those people, particularly over 70 years of age? Why is it actually going and doing the most damage there? No answers to that yet, but we obviously have seen that is the reality, particularly in the urban areas and those long-term care facilities, what I think everyone's kind of deeming as the hot spots. And once it's in, you almost know that it's going to spread. But I think as a result of the great frontline people and the work that's being done, in many cases they are able. I express my sincere, heartfelt sympathy to those that have lost loved ones as a result of COVID. And we are trying to do as much as we can, as quickly as we can, to address and stop the spread, taking whatever actions we can. Locally, to your point, there have been a few outbreaks. I do know, again, Dr. R, in one of his most recent communications, said some of the folks at Mapleview were actually able to have a little celebration because some had it and actually came through and survived and were able to actually cohabitate, if you will, because they now have that immunity built up. So we will, and I think you've seen crystal clear, both from Minister Fullerton and the Premier, long-term care for a long time was not probably given the priority that it needed. We're facing that, and it is an area that certainly has risen to the limelight and says it needs a bigger long-term fix as we come out of COVID, but also for future. And I'm someone who has spent a lot of time. I was critic for 2 years of long-term care, and will do whatever I can to try to help Minister Fullerton and our government move forward to make improvements.
Well, that's good to hear, Bill, because I know that myself I think every one of us at some point will either have parents in long-term care or some kind of retirement setting, or we will experience it ourselves. And so it becomes incredibly important to us. And let's hope that the government will take up the challenge and deal with long-term care in a whole and complete way, that the best home care system and long-term care system in Canada, if not the world. So let's hope we can do that. Let's hope.
David, if I can, just before we move on, I do want to make sure we temper expectation. It is a large area of government. It's not going to be done overnight. It is going to take time and effort and diligence, frankly, to get there. And I say that again as a former critic who understood the magnitude of how big it is and how big it has an impact. And let's not forget the realities of finance. That there isn't just, again, an open checkbook to say, just fix this tomorrow and here's your check. There is going to have to be some change, absolutely. But I just don't want people thinking that just because even at the Premier level saying we are going to fix it, that it's going to be an immediate. I mean, I think there were a lot of good things going on that were being done under the minister's leadership before. In our own backyard, we've been pushing for things like Grey Gables and Markdale, and that is moving forward. But again, they're not going to happen just overnight because we come out of COVID. So definitely a priority, but just want to temper expectation.
Well, Bill, I could say maybe that's something for the second mandate, or when you and I get there. Let's hope it might be the former and not the latter.
Well, and I'm very hopeful for the former as well.
Well, Bill, it's a challenge for sure, and you're right. You can't solve the issue by throwing money at it. That's probably the worst solution. It has to be going back to basic principles. What do we want? What are the standards? And as you know, the complexity of the issue is certainly something that will have to be teased out. And I'm sure that the lessons learned exercise from COVID-19 is going to be absolutely fascinating and probably result in a changed orientation for a lot of things in this province, not just long-term care, but hospital care. Who knows? The list would be long.
Absolutely, David. I think one of the more remarkable things, if we, I always try to look for hope even in the darkest day, is there's been a lot of innovation brought to the fore to combat COVID, whether it be across technology platforms, how we look at businesses that are stepping up that used to do XYZ business and have totally transformed their business today. That again, I believe from a manufacturing, if I can, that's a big area of our province that we've lost over the last number of years, that I think a lot of people are going to sit back and say, do we really want a lot of this to be offshore? And I mean offshore from the perspective, we can't control how access we can get, how quickly we can get. So these things that are tangible, respirators, those type of things that are absolutely critical to our healthcare, we may need to take a secondary look and say, are we prepared, frankly, to pay a little bit more to ensure that it's created here where we have control and access? And some of those companies, I hope, are going to continue to say, hey, there is viable opportunities here. And I think Minister Phillips in his economic recovery has struck a large committee, and he's got a portal that there are some people in our backyard that have called me and said, how do I access this? How do I want to be able to have input into the manufacturing side and the supply chain? Because I have some ideas. I think you're going to see a great deal of ingenuity that in essence is going to strengthen and show collaboration amongst not just Ontario, but Canadians, that we control a lot of these things and put the focus back on. It is important to keep it close to home so that we never are in a situation where we're reliant on someone else who, yes, they came through, and thank goodness they have at the end of the day. But there were certainly some early days when you were starting to be concerned about things like PPE that we can factually manufacture here in Ontario. So lots of good opportunity to come.
Yes, it's going to be a very interesting time. One of the things that the government was very excited about and active in prior to the COVID-19 pandemic was reform of a number of areas, including public health. But dare I say it, public health is certainly proving that it is a valued partner. It's always been kind of seen as the quiet partner in healthcare. But in these days, they're front and center, and they're certainly proving that public health is an incredibly important part of our healthcare rainbow, if you will, or our healthcare tools.
Sure. David, and thank you. Before I answer the bulk of that, I just want to say a true and sincere thank you to Dr. Ara and his team. I'm in virtually daily contact. I joked with him the other night that I think we probably speak to each other more than we do to our wives, even though we're not in the same location. But he has really stepped to the plate. I have the greatest respect and admiration for not only his knowledge and his expertise, but his approach to being the public health officer in our area and working as collaboratively with people to make sure we can move forward as possible. Having stated that, I think it does go back to, yes, certainly I'm not certain a lot of people would even known Dr. Ara's name before COVID. Now I don't trust there's a person in Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound who doesn't know who he is. When we were looking at reforming, the whole intent was actually, frankly, to make it even better, to make sure we had those processes from a public risk and safety, to really focus on what the intent they do. He will be the first to say to you, I'm not your front line, I'm not your hospital. I don't want to get in the way of hospital. That's not my expertise. They want to do the proactive. They want to do the stuff that ensures that the broader public health of people is taken into consideration. And I think, again, a positive, certainly in our own backyard, is to see that we have one of the most capable people probably in the world leading closely by. But I think he'll bring ideas as well as we continue to transform and make public health the best it can be, using examples from this of how can we do this across the province? How can we take best practices, respecting that we do have urban and rural issues and northern Ontario issues that aren't all the same, but how do we do it in an open, communicative, collaborative, and people-first mentality? So again, I think they've done a great job across the board, and certainly locally, we're very fortunate to have Dr. Ara and his team.
Bill, believe it or not, we're just about out of time, so I want to thank you for the comments you've shared and the ideas, and best wishes to you and your colleagues in the legislature and in cabinet as you do a very difficult job for us as you govern this province in this time of difficulty and challenge. Bill Walker, thank you very much for being on Politically Speaking. Friends, thank you. We'll see you next week.